She thought the Mafia boss loved her until his uncle said her father there was the man they made disappear 16 years ago. For 43 days, Nomi believed she had become more than a secretary, more than a liability, more than another woman pulled into the Marchetti darkness. Severo touched her like she mattered, protected her like she was precious, looked at her like losing her would break something he could not rebuild. Then Ottavio returned from Sicily, walked into the Marchetti dining room, and said her last name out loud like a loaded gun. Damiani. The same name as the man they made disappear 16 years ago. The table froze. Severo did not deny it. He only warned Ottavio to choose his next word carefully. That was when Nomi understood. She was not just the woman Severo wanted. She was the evidence that could destroy him. People rarely notice the exact moment they step into danger. They tell themselves it is only a job, only one bad day, only one powerful man behind a closed door. For Lina Damiani, the temporary secretaria's desk came with a silence so thick it seemed to press against her skin. No one smiled. The guards spoke in clipped phrases, as if every word had already been approved before it left their mouths. She only wanted to survive the day, collect her pay, and go home to her mother's apartment in Queens, where the bills sat in neat, accusing piles beside prescription bottles. Then she served coffee to Severo Marchetti, let her eyes wander where they should not have, and asked one question she could never take back. That was how everything began. Not with a threat, not with a gun, but with curiosity, exhaustion, fear, and a stalled subway car that trapped her underground for 12 breathless minutes. Doors finally opened. Lina pushed through the crowd, her hair coming loose, and a coffee stain spreading across the front of her blouse. She ran 6 blocks in heels toward the Marchetti building, feeling every sharp glance from strangers on the sidewalk. The tower rose above her in cold marble and glass, perfect in a way she could not possibly match. At the front desk, the receptionist studied her name on the visitor log, as if it were already evidence of a mistake. When the elevator opened on the 22nd floor, Lina stepped out and stopped. The silence was not peaceful. It felt arranged. Every desk was spotless, every face lowered, every movement careful. Her own panic suddenly felt loud and embarrassing. She noticed a security camera turned slightly toward her, then another near the hall. Nothing in that office moved by accident. Even before she met the man who owned the floor, Lina understood. She had walked into a place where people survived by becoming invisible. Raphael Key was waiting for her with a watch in one hand, and disappointment already written across his face. He was in his 50s, lean, severe, and polished in the way of men who never wasted expression. Lina opened her mouth to explain the subway delay, but his glance made the excuse die before it reached the air. He gave her the rules without softening a single word. Be punctual, be discreet. Never enter the inner office unless called, never interrupt, never call twice, and never open an anonymous envelope. At the last rule, his eyes held hers a moment too long. Lina nodded too quickly, pretending she understood more than she did. Behind him, a locked cabinet bore a faded label DM. Nothing to her yet, but they caught somewhere in her mind. The building had its own weather, its own laws, and she had arrived inside it already late, already noticed, already one step behind whatever game was being played around her. Her desk had an absurdly expensive chair and a bleak black and white photograph of a foggy harbor. The office around her was so quiet it reminded her of a hospital corridor before bad news. From that chair, she watched 4 men enter the inner office. None of them smiled. One had the empty stare of a man who had stopped asking himself questions years ago. Another came out with a fresh bandage wrapped around his hand, red already seeping through the white. He tucked it away quickly and no one reacted. Lina looked down at the paper clips on her desk and began sorting them by color. It was pointless, but it gave her hands something to do, while her instinct screamed. Under a stack of outdated invoices, she found a torn corner of paper stamped with the same initials she had seen on the cabinet DM. The date beside it was nearly 2 decades old. She put it back exactly where it had been, but she remembered. By noon, she had built 3 small towers of paper clips, all of them crooked. The phones chimed softly, doors closed without sound, and even footsteps seemed trained to disappear into the carpet. Everyone on that floor moved, as if taking up space might offend someone dangerous. Then the heavy double doors opened. Severo Marchetti stepped out, and the room tightened around him. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing dark religious tattoos across his forearms. He did not hurry. He did not need to. Lina understood that before he said a word. Some men announce power. Marchetti simply entered a room, and everyone else adjusted. His gaze passed over the office like a blade checking its own edge. When it reached Lina, it paused for less than a second, but that was enough. She had the sudden irrational feeling that he had seen the coffee stain, the panic, the paper clips, and every thought she had tried to hide. His jaw was sharp, his eyes dark and unreadable, and his presence had a cold weight that made Lena forget the stain on her blouse, and until he looked straight at her. He did not ask her name. He did not comment on her lateness. He only ordered a double espresso in a black cup from the top shelf, then turned back into his office. In the break room, her nerves made her clumsy. She dragged over a stool, stretched for the cup, knocked one loose, grabbed for it too late, and sent 3 more crashing down after it. Ceramic shattered across the floor. Lena stood frozen above the mess, suddenly aware that even a cup could become evidence against her. She crouched too fast, sliced her thumb on a shard, and bit back a curse. A drop of blood fell beside the broken black porcelain. It seemed absurdly dramatic, like the office had demanded a payment before allowing her to continue. She should have reported it. Instead, she dug through her purse and found a tube of super glue, because panic is strangely practical when it has no better options. With trembling fingers, she attached the broken handle to the least damaged black cup and held it in place until the glue caught. Somehow, it stayed. A few minutes later, she carried the espresso towards Sio's office in a cup held together by glue and desperation. She nudged the door open with her elbow. Sio stood over his desk, broad shoulders outlined against the Manhattan skyline. The city glowed behind him, distant and untouchable. While Lena prayed, he would not notice how badly her hands were shaking. On his desk lay a leather folder stamped with an old family crest and a handwritten note half covered by his palm. She caught only 2 letters before he turned the paper over. A.D. Something in her chest tightened without knowing why. She placed the fragile cup near his tattooed hand and tried to leave quickly. But nerves do strange things to attention. Her eyes slipped over the sharp line of his trousers and stopped exactly where they should not have. Heat rushed into her face. She looked away, then looked back by accident, and hated herself for it. She had almost reached the door when her mouth betrayed her completely. In a whisper too loud for the dead silence, she asked whether the shape in his pants was real, or whether it was a gun. Sio went still, the files in his hand lowered. Then he turned toward her, slowly, as if giving her time to understand how badly she had miscalculated. Lena's wounded thumb throbbed against the coffee tray. The glued handle gave a soft, dangerous click. For 1 second, she thought the cup would break before he spoke, and that somehow seemed less frightening than whatever his answer might be. By the time Lena looked up, he was already too close. His body cut off the room around her, bringing with it the scent of expensive wood, cold soap, and something darker she could not name. He leaned down near her ear, close enough that his voice moved against her skin. Why are you afraid of what is in my pants? Her lungs forgot how to work. Words had always saved her before. Nervous words, clever words, apologetic words. Now there were none. Sio watched her struggle with a trace of amusement that was almost worse than anger. Then he stepped back, lifted the cup, tasted the coffee, and dismissed her with one flat complaint, weak. But as she turned to escape, he added her name. Not Miss Damiani. Lena, she had not told him to use it. She had barely been introduced. The sound of it in his voice followed her, through the door like a hand, closing around the back of her neck. He returned to his documents as if nothing had happened. Lena escaped into the hallway, closed the heavy door behind her, and leaned against it with her eyes shut. On her first day, she had asked the most intimidating man she had ever met about the contents of his trousers. Her memory replayed the words with cruel precision. She could almost hear Elise laughing, then screaming, then telling her to quit before lunch. But quitting was not simple. The salary was better than anything she had found in months, and her mother's medical bills were stacked at home, like a second landlord. Lena wiped her palms on her skirt, straightened her blazer, and stayed. Test, the restroom, washed the blood from her thumb, and looked at herself in the mirror. One day she whispered, "You will stop walking into rooms you don't understand." But even then, she knew she was lying. Curiosity had already made a home in her. She had worked for difficult bosses before, but none of them could change the temperature of a room by standing in it. Still, she returned the next morning determined to behave like someone employable. That illusion lasted until 9:12, when the phone rang and she answered in her best corporate voice. The receiver slipped from her hand, bounced off the desk, and disappeared under it. She dropped to her knees, crawling after the cord while apologizing to a dial tone. When she came back up, Raphael was watching from across the office. He said nothing. That was worse. Lena sat down slowly, cheeks burning, and decided that surviving humiliation might become part of the job. Then she noticed something taped beneath the desk drawer, a narrow strip of paper with 3 numbers and a name scratched into it. Damiani. The letters were faint, almost rubbed away, but they were there. Her own last name, hidden in a desk she had been assigned by accident. The first week moved at a brutal pace. C.O. Marchetti handed her assignments that felt less like office work and more like traps set to measure weakness. She translated Italian documents for hours, circling words she half understood, checking meanings twice, then doubting herself anyway. He never corrected her. He only scanned the pages, glanced at her once, and moved on. The silence left her guessing whether she was useful or already finished. On the second day, while sorting old files, a photograph slipped from a folder marked with a faded shipping code, DM. Two boys stood barefoot in the grass, with their backs turned to a large house. Behind them, barely visible near the porch, stood a man Lena did not recognize at first. He was younger, leaner, smiling in a way she had only seen in one family photo kept in her mother's bedroom. Her father, Aldo Damiani. The folder suddenly felt heavier in her hands. Lena picked up the photograph and felt something tighten in her chest. The older boy held the younger one's hand, as if letting go would be dangerous. The man behind them was half-shadowed, his face blurred by age and poor lighting. But Lena knew the angle of the jaw. She had inherited it. On the back, someone had written a faded note about a summer long gone, signed with initials she almost missed. AD. She should have put it back. Instead, she looked toward the closed office door, then slipped the photograph between pages in her notebook. By the third day, she had also met Tommaso, the tall stern guard posted outside CO's office. Hoping to break the silence, she asked whether they were hiding nuclear weapons in the filing cabinets. Tommaso did not blink, but his eyes dropped for half a second to her notebook. The joke collapsed at her feet, and Lena understood that hiding things in that office was harder than it looked. Tommaso's indifference bothered her more than it should have. Treated like furniture, Lena talked too much, filling every pause before it could swallow her. And he finally told her, without cruelty and without humor, that she talked too much. The words landed because they were true. She laughed too brightly and pretended not to care. But later, when his posture shifted by the smallest degree, she caught herself reading it as friendliness. That frightened her. She was already searching for warmth in a place built to withhold it. Then CO appeared in person instead of calling. He stood beside her desk, his tattooed arm close enough to cast a shadow over her paperwork. Lena slid her notebook beneath a folder before he could see the edge of the stolen photograph. CO's eyes followed the movement. He said nothing, but the silence was not empty. It had teeth. Lena wondered whether he already knew exactly what she had taken. As CO leaned in, Lena's senses overloaded. His warmth filled the narrow space, along with that dark, woody scent she had begun to recognize against her will. His sleeve brushed her arm for less than a second, but her mind went blank as if the contact had stolen language from her. She looked up too quickly and asked whether he always stood close enough to intimidate people, or if that was a special service for new employees. Tommaso's eyes flicked toward her, almost amused. CO did not move. He studied her in silence, deciding perhaps whether she was brave, stupid, or simply too exhausted to be afraid properly. Lena held his stare and regretted it immediately. Then she did something even worse. She glanced down at his forearm and said, "Saint Rita, patron saint of impossible causes." CO's expression did not change, but the air around him did, and both of them knew it. By the time CO walked away, Lena felt as if she had run up 20 flights of stairs. The office returned to its careful rhythm, but her pulse did not. Raphael soon handed her the next assignment, a simple errand to Bensonhurst. He said it as if there was nothing strange about sending a temporary secretary across Brooklyn in a black sedan with a silent driver. Lena asked twice what she was delivering, and received 2 answers that explained nothing. Before leaving, she copied the file number into her notebook, DM 1987. She told herself it was for organization, but the initials had begun to bother her. In the sedan, she pretended to check directions while saving the driver's face in the reflection of her phone screen. When they the phone Sophia. The restaurant looked modest from the street, almost friendly. But the locks on the back door told another story. Friendly places did not need steel reinforcement, and men who watched rooftops before opening doors. Inside, Leander's warmth and threat lived side by side. The kitchen smelled of garlic bread and simmering sauce, but the reinforced glass, double locks, and watchful men kept Lena from relaxing. Moved around Raphael in a silent choreography of obedience. It was not respect. She could see that now. It was practice. She was left near the back hall with a folder clutched against her chest, quietly memorizing faces, exits, and the camera above the freezer door. Raphael answered her questions with just enough information to make her feel foolish for asking. Outside the kitchen, 2 guards suddenly stopped speaking. The silence changed shape. Lena turned before she knew why. A nearby shelf, behind jars of imported tomatoes, She saw a framed photograph of the same two boys from the file. This time Sios's younger face was clear. The older boy looked at the camera as if he hated it. The younger one was laughing. Their hands were still linked. A scarred enforcer stood in the doorway, looking at her as if she were an item misplaced in hostile territory. His gaze moved over her slowly, measuring nerves, posture, weakness. One hand stayed too near his jacket. Lena's throat tightened, but she forced herself to notice details. Scar under the left eye, silver ring, limp on the right side. Before panic could make her step backward, Tommaso moved in front of her. He did not draw a weapon. He did not raise his voice. He simply became a wall between her and the man staring at her. The scarred man smiled once and moved away. Lena should have felt relieved. Instead, she memorized his face. When Tommaso turned, she whispered, "Who is he?" He did not answer. That told her enough to be afraid. On the ride back, she wrote every detail down before memory softened it. If danger was going to circle her, she would at least learn its shape. At the end of the week, Sios swept past her desk like a quiet storm. He paused at the elevator, looked at her with that precise, unreadable focus, and said she had survived longer than expected. There was no warmth in it. It sounded like an inventory note. Lena, tired enough to be reckless, asked if he had placed bets on her failure. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. Barely. Not a smile, not really, but close enough that her mind held on to it. That night, while Elise ate noodles on Lena's couch, she pointed her chopsticks at Lena and said, "I know you've mentioned him 6 times in 10 minutes. Lena denied it too quickly. Elise leaned forward, saw the notebook open on the coffee table, and frowned at the copied codes. "This isn't a crush," she said. "This looks like a crime board." Lena closed the notebook. She did not say Elise was wrong. On the commute home, Bensonhurst kept replaying in Lena's mind. The scarred man's stare, the way the guard stopped talking, Tommaso stepping in front of her without hesitation. When Elise called Leander's a money laundering front, Lena laughed too fast. Not because it was funny, because silence would have made the possibility real. The photograph of the two boys was still hidden in her notebook. She had carried it home, placed it under a stack of bills, then taken it out again before bed. She searched the initials AD beside the old shipping code and found nothing useful, which only made her more restless. Then her mother called from the bedroom, asking whether Lena had moved the old blue photo album. Lena froze. In that album was the only picture of Aldo, wearing a linen shirt outside an Italian restaurant. She waited until her mother fell asleep before opening it. The restaurant sign behind him was partly cut off, but one word remained visible: Leander's. At home, her mother's apartment was quiet and neat, lined with prescription bottles, folded blankets, and small economies of care. Lena should have felt grounded there. Instead, the office came with her. She heard Sios's low voice while washing dishes. She remembered the rhythm of his footsteps while checking her Mother SS medication. She caught herself identifying his scent in memory: wood and smoke and cold restraint. It was not romance. Not yet. It was alertness sharpened into obsession. Her body had begun cataloging him the way a person memorizes exits in a dangerous room. Still, when she found the photograph again, she touched the faded image gently, then wrote the initials on a fresh page. Beside them, she added her father's full name, Aldo Damiani. The page looked harmless, just ink and paper, but it made her feel as if she had opened a door beneath her own life. Somewhere behind that door, Seo Marchetti was already waiting. Her promotion came without warning. Raphael moved a stack of files to her desk and said she would now assist Seo directly on certain matters. Lena asked whether she had done something, right or wrong. Raphael looked at her for a long second and said both, possibly. Usefulness inside the Marchetti office felt uncomfortably close to captivity. Seo began working in small, deliberate ways, prolonged eye contact, delayed handoffs that made their fingers brush, a lowered voice that pulled her attention, even when she wanted to resist. Lena noticed each tactic, hated that she noticed, then began writing down what he gave away when he thought she was only flustered. He favored his left shoulder when tense. His jaw tightened at the name Leander. He never let anyone stand behind him. And when the name Damiani appeared on a document she was not supposed to see, he removed the page before Raphael could collect the folder. One afternoon, Seo leaned over Scout to review a document, and Lena's eyes caught the tattoo on his forearm. Saint Rita of Cassia, patron saint of hopeless causes. The symbol seemed almost cruel on his skin. She knew better than to ask. She asked anyway. Why would a man like you wear a saint? The office noise vanished beneath the question. Seo's gaze moved to hers slowly, dark and predatory, but not angry. That made it harder to breathe. Lena kept her hands flat on the desk, so he would not see them tremble. Then she added, quieter, did AD believe in saints too? For 1 second, Seo's face changed. Not much. A flicker at the mouth, a shadow through the eyes, a small failure in the mask. Lena saw it. So did Tommaso. Raphael from across the room stopped writing. Seo did not answer, but the silence told her she had reached into something old enough to hurt. Seo did not answer either question. His jaw tightened once, then eased, But this time Lena knew she had hit something real. The silence stretched until she felt every reckless word she had spoken sitting between them. When he finally walked away, she exhaled too late and too loudly. That small survival gave her a dangerous rush. The next day, when her lunch break disappeared under another stack of impossible work, she did not stay quiet. She entered his office without permission, heart hammering, and demanded 20 minutes to eat like a human being. The room outside went still. Even Tommaso looked up. Lena heard her own voice and wondered who had borrowed her body to say it. Sio stared at her, then at the open door behind her. She had broken protocol in front of everyone. For one brief second, anger flashed across his face with startling force. It vanished quickly, but not before Lena saw something human and uncontrolled beneath the discipline. Her demand followed her down the corridor, like smoke. No one spoke to Sio Marchetti that way, especially not a temporary secretary with a coffee stain still faintly visible on one sleeve. Co's reaction was not loud. He only went still. That was enough to make her courage feel suddenly borrowed and overdue. He studied her as if deciding whether to crush the insolence or keep it for entertainment. 20 minutes, he said at last, not 21. Lena nodded, turned, and walked away before her knees could betray her. Behind her, Tommaso's mouth twitched. It was the nearest thing to applause. She was likely to get in that building. But later, when she returned, her desk drawer had been opened. Nothing obvious was missing. The notebook was exactly where she had left it, too exactly. The photograph had been shifted by less than an inch. Lena sat down and understood the message. Sio had let her challenge him in public. In private, he had reminded her whose building this was. The next morning, a plate of expensive gnocchi waited on her desk with no card. Lena stared at it for a full minute. It was too specific to be random, too quiet to be kindness. Tommaso avoided her eyes, which told her more than any note could have. She ate because she was hungry, and because refusing felt like giving the gesture too much power. Still, every bite tasted like an unanswered question. Soon after, she found herself in the back of a sedan with Sio himself. She pressed herself toward the door, but 16 inches of leather and silence made the spaces between them feel intimate in a way no room ever had. Halfway across Brooklyn, she opened her notebook deliberately and wrote in front of him, "He rewards after punishment." Sio's eyes dropped to the words, not hide them. For once, she wanted him to know she was not blind. His mouth curved, but the expression did not reach his eyes. For 10 minutes, Sio said nothing. Lena watched the city slide past the tinted windows and tried not to fidget. When the driver braked hard, Sio's arm shot out in front of her chest so quickly it seemed instinctive. He withdrew it just as fast, rebuilding the cold wall before she could thank him. She made a nervous joke about whether someone was chasing them. He looked out the window and said, "Maybe someone is." Then he asked why a law student was working in his office. Lena gave him the polished version first. He waded through it until there was nothing left to hide behind. Before answering, she asked him why a man with guards, money, and fear at his command still checked every reflective surface before entering a room. That time, he did not smile. The question landed too cleanly. For the first time, Sio looked less like a predator, and more like a man who knew exactly what hunted him. At last, Lena told him the truth. Her mother was sick. The bills were relentless. The job paid enough to keep the lights on, and the prescriptions filled. Sio did not soften with pity, and somehow that was easier to bear. He only said she was terrible at pretending. Lena looked at him and replied that he was not very good at pretending either. His eyes shifted to her, sharp enough to make her regret it. The phone, Sophia. As they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, his hand rested on the leather seat between them, leaving the smallest space between his fingers and hers. Lena looked at that narrow gap and felt the absurd urge to close it. She did not. Instead, she asked whether he had known Aldo Damiani. The driver's shoulders tightened. Sio's hand disappeared from the seat. Outside, the river moved gray beneath the bridge. Inside the car, the silence turned from intimate to dangerous. "Do not use names you do not understand," Sio said. At Leander's, Sio belonged to the room in a way no one else did. Men straightened when he passed. Conversations died before he reached them. Behind a closed door, his voice changed into something flat and lethal. Lena could not catch every word, but she understood enough. A promise, not a warning. Someone had crossed him, and mercy had not entered the discussion. When he came out again, his face was calm, his cuffs neat, his expression empty. Then Lena saw the small dark red stain at the edge of his white sleeve. It was tiny, almost hidden, but her stomach turned as if it had spread across the whole room. This time, she did not look away fast enough. Sio saw her looking. The mask slipped for half a second, and beneath it was not cruelty. It was irritation at himself. He had made a mistake. He knew it. Lena knew it too. That tiny stain became the first proof that his control was not perfect. Sio caught her looking. Without a flicker of shame, he fastened the cuff and covered the stain. The gesture was practiced, but too quick. Lena saw the impatience in it. He walked away, and she followed because everyone else did. Her mind kept circling the same question. and refusing to land on the answer. Outside, her heel caught on uneven pavement. Sio's hand closed around her arm before she fell. His grip was firm, warm, controlled. He held on a moment longer than necessary, and Lena hated how quickly her body steadied under his touch. When he let go, the cold air rushed back in, and she missed the heat before she could stop herself. A black SUV rolled slowly past the restaurant, then turned the corner without stopping. Co's gaze sharpened. Tommaso moved his hand inside his jacket. Whatever had happened behind the door was not finished. For the first time, Lena saw danger approaching Co, not just coming from him. That brief touch stayed with her, longer than it should have. On the silent drive back, she kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if discipline could erase memory from skin. Days later, she realized she had started perfecting his coffee without being asked. Less foam, stronger pull, black cup warmed first. She told herself it was professionalism, but the truth sat beside the cup like a second shadow. When Co took a sip and said, "Acceptable," one cold word from him warmed some foolish part of her. "You are welcome, Your Majesty," she replied before she could stop herself. And the silence between them changed again. But this time she did not let the moment consume her. She slid a translated page across the desk and said one sentence had been altered. A payment reference had been removed. Co read it, then looked up, not amused, not angry, caught. Lena had found something he had missed. The 5:30 coffee became a ritual, and rituals are dangerous because they make unstable things feel predictable. Then an unmarked black box appeared on her desk. Inside was an expensive high-necked black dress, soft as water and severe as a command. No note, no explanation. Lena lifted it from the tissue paper and felt anger rise beneath the shock. It was beautiful, yes, but beauty did not make it harmless. Co was choosing how she would appear beside him before she had agreed to stand there at all. In the restroom mirror, she held the dress against her body, then photographed the label and tucked the receipt code into her notebook. When she came out, Co was waiting near her desk. "You do not like it," he said. Lena met his eyes. "I do not like being dressed like evidence." The word hung between them. Evidence. His expression tightened before he could stop it. There it was again, a crack. When she asked Tommaso whether wardrobe changes were part of her job description, he said, "In this office, most things are not written down." It was the closest he had ever come to humor. That evening she was taken to Cipriani Wall Street, where stone columns rose high, enough to make ordinary people feel temporary. The hall glittered with polished wealth, expensive watches, and smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. Beside Co, Lena felt the distance between her life and his widen until it almost had a sound. She had ridden the subway from Queens that morning. Now men worth millions lowered their voices when Co turned his head. She also noticed the other things: the exit behind the bar, the man with an earpiece pretending to be a waiter, the older woman who stopped speaking when she heard the name Damiani announced at the check-in table. Lena smiled because she had to, but behind that smile she was counting every reaction. The jump from crowded trains to gilded marble left Lena unsteady. She watched powerful men approach Co with careful hesitation, offering compliments like tribute. Their wives looked past him too quickly. Their sons pretended not to stare. In that room, Co was not simply respected. He was assessed the way one assesses weather before a storm. No one treated him as an equal, not even men who owned buildings, politicians, and judges. They moved around him with the caution of people crossing thin ice, and understood why he had chosen it. It did not make her beautiful for him. It made her visible as his, but visibility worked both ways. People looked at her because of Co, and in looking, they exposed themselves. One man saw her face, went pale, and turned away so quickly he nearly knocked over a glass. Lena memorized him. Co noticed. His hand tightened at her back. Co moved through the room with polished calm, wearing just enough smile to pass for civility. When he stepped away, Lena found herself alone near the table, hands cold around a glass she had not tasted. That was when Gideon Salvarezza approached. He was beautiful in a practiced way, smooth, bright-eyed, and far too comfortable entering another man's silence. His first compliment sounded harmless. His second did not. When he mentioned that Co never brought assistance to events, Lena heard the question hidden underneath. "Who are you to him?" She smiled politely, because politeness had been trained into her, but her body had already begun looking for an exit. Gideon leaned closer and said her eyes reminded him of someone. Lena's fingers tightened on the glass. "A man who owed the wrong family money," he added softly. "Or maybe a man who knew too much." Before she could answer, he smiled as if they were discussing weather. That was how predators tested locks. Gideon offered his hand, and Lena accepted because refusing would have created a scene. His grip lingered a second too long. His thumb brushed her skin as if testing what she would allow. Lena smiled and shifted her glass into her other hand, freeing herself before the pressure became obvious. Then CO appeared behind her. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His hand settled at the base of her spine, firm and unmistakable. Gideon understood immediately. His smile thinned, and he stepped back with a small bow. Lena stood between them, furious at being handled and shaken by how relieved she felt. Then she surprised both men by stepping sideways out from under CO's hand. "I can stand on my own," she said quietly. Gideon's brows lifted. CO's hand remained suspended for half a second before he lowered it. The mistake was small, almost invisible, but in their world, small public embarrassments carried weight. CO had claimed her. Lena had refused the claim in front of a rival. Gideon withdrew, but the damage lingered. CO did not touch her again immediately, and somehow the absence was as charged as the contact had been. Resentment and heat tangled, until Lena could no longer tell which feeling had started first. She excused herself to the restroom, needing air. Inside, 2 women were already talking. One called her Marchetti's latest acquisition. Another said the last one had disappeared after 3 months. A third voice added that girls with Damiani eyes always brought trouble. Lena stared into the mirror, the black dress suddenly too tight at the throat. She waited until they left, then locked herself in a stall and searched the phrase Damiani eyes. Nothing came up. That frightened her more than a result would have. Some histories were not hidden on the internet because they had never been allowed to exist there. When she stepped out, a small folded note had been left beside the sink. "Ask CO what happened at Pier 19. She returned to the table with cold hands and a face carefully arranged into calm. Her fear had made her clumsy, though. She fumbled with her cutlery, then made a dry joke about being raised among forks, with clearer job descriptions. CO's mouth flickered. It was so quick she might have imagined it, but it loosened something in her chest. Then his phone rang. The change in him was instant. His face emptied. His voice dropped into Italian, fast, sharp, and merciless. Lena caught 2 words that did not belong in any business conversation. Damiani file. The man who had almost smiled at her vanished behind the commander giving orders. But this time she did not simply freeze. She lowered her napkin, stood and walked away from the table. Before he finished the call, CO's eyes snapped to her. For 1 second, he lost the thread of what the man on the phone was saying. Lena saw it. So did Gideon from across the room. As CO ended the call, the hand that had once seemed steadying became something else entirely in Lena's memory. A claim, a warning, a reminder that nothing in his world was ever simple. Hours later, at her queen's doorstep, the cost followed her home. A dark vehicle waited across the street with its engine off, silent in the shadows. Lena stopped on the pavement, keys clenched between her fingers. Men sat behind the wheel, watching the building where her mother slept. He would call it protection. She knew that before anyone said it. This time, instead of looking away, Lena lifted her phone and photographed the license plate. Then she crossed the street and knocked on the driver's window. The man looked startled before smoothing his face. "Good," she thought. "Let him be startled." "Tell your boss," she said through the glass. "I am not a package he can track." Then she walked inside before fear could catch up. The next morning, Lena went around the guards instead of through them. She took 2 trains, entered the Marchetti building by the service door, and walked straight to CO's private office before fear could talk her out of it. He was alone, jacket off, sleeves rolled, one hand braced against the desk as if he had not expected to be seen unguarded. She placed the license plate photo on his desk and demanded to know why men were watching her home. His answer was quiet. Proximity to him made her a target. Lena said she had never agreed to belong inside his war. For a moment, something in his face shifted, and he told her the guards would stay. Lena picked up a letter opener from his desk and drove it through the printed photograph, pinning it to the wood. "I understand this," she said. "If your war reaches my mother again, I stop being polite." CO looked at the blade, then at her. For once, he had no immediate answer. The refusal sent Lena home angrier than before, but anger kept her moving. She opened her laptop after midnight and began digging through public records, old articles, shipping documents, anything with the Marchetti name attached. She wrote dates on sticky notes, drew arrows between companies, found charges that vanished before trial, and kept circling 2 names, Vittorio Marchetti and Aldo Damiani. By dawn, her table was covered in paper and cooling coffee. She was no longer simply reacting to CO's world. She was studying it. One old customs notice placed Damiani shipping beside a Marchetti warehouse in 2007. Then the trail vanished like someone had paid to erase it. The phrase Pier 19 appeared in a scanned court index, but the file itself was missing. Lena leaned back, exhausted and suddenly cold. Missing files were not accidents. Her father had not merely brushed against the Marchetti family. He had been standing close enough to disappear from the record. Denial collapsed slowly, then all at once. The legitimate shipping records, The strange security, the coded conversations, the way men lowered their eyes around Sio, every piece pointed in the same direction. He was not just a ruthless businessman with dangerous friends. He was power with a legal address. Nina walked through Queens that evening, clutching her handbag so tightly. Her fingers ached, indifferent to what she now knew. She had wanted a job. She had found a criminal empire wearing expensive glass and Italian tailoring. Worse, her father's name had appeared at the edge of that empire. And Sio had already acted as if he knew. When her phone buzzed, she expected Elise. Instead, a blocked number sent one line: "Stop asking about Pier 19 unless you want your mother to remember the night she forgot." Nina stood under a buzzing streetlight and read it twice. Her fear sharpened into something colder. Someone was no longer just watching her. Someone was answering. On a lonely corner, footsteps began behind her. At first, Lena told herself not to be dramatic. Then they matched her pace. Her breath shortened. Her keys slipped between her fingers like a poor imitation of courage. Before she could run, Tommaso appeared from the mouth of an alley and stepped into the path behind her. He said nothing. The footsteps stopped. Nina did not turn to see who had been following her. Instead, she asked Tommaso for the man's name. Tommaso's silence was answer enough. Soon after, she was taken to the Marchetti house on Staten Island. The mansion rose behind iron gates, not like a home, but like a warning built in stone. In the car, Lena looked at Tommaso's reflection and said, "If Sio ordered this, blink once." He did not blink. "If someone else is moving against me, say nothing." Tommaso's face remained still, but his hand tightened on the wheel. Lena had her answer. Lena refused to wear the gown Sio had sent for dinner. Instead, she chose her own modest dress, pinned her hair herself, and kept her shoes practical enough to run in. It was a small rebellion, but it was hers. When Sio saw her, his eyes moved over the outfit with surprise, then something closer to reassessment. At the table, the real danger came from Lucrezia, whose warm smile arrived with too much touch and too many questions. At the head sat Vittorio Marchetti, paralyzed but still terrifying, his body weakened and his stare untouched. The room behaved around him as if he were still capable of ordering a death with one blink. Nina noticed the servants never turned their backs on him. She noticed Sio stood slightly closer to Vittorio than to anyone else. Not affection, defense, or guilt. Lucrezia touched Lena's wrist and called her poor little Damiani girl. Sio's glass cracked in his hand. He had gripped it too hard. Vittorio's eyes settled on Lena and did not leave. He asked about her family name as if it had simply interested him over dinner. Damiani. The word moved through the room too quietly. Lena felt her fingers tighten around her napkin, but this time she did not look down. She asked whether he had known her father. Sio noticed before anyone else could and redirected the conversation with smooth precision, asking Niccolo about Sicily, turning every gaze away from her question. Lena looked at him then, confused by the timing of his protection and angry at the answer he had stolen from her. The tension snapped when Nive Marchetti burst in late, laughing and apologizing to no one properly. But before Nive reached her chair, Vittorio's fingers tapped twice against the armrest. Lucrezia went pale. Sio stepped closer to the table. Nina did not know the code, but everyone else did. Whatever Vittorio had just said without speaking, it involved her. Nive's laughter changed the air, though not enough to erase what had passed through the room. For the first time, the Marchetti house felt less like a courtroom and more like a family, though not a safe one. Nive discovered that Lena was the secretary from the infamous coffee incident. She nearly choked on her wine and declared Lena a legend. The humiliation should have burned. Instead, it gave Lena a strange place at the table. Nive explained the family hierarchy with the casual ease of someone describing weather, who listened to whom, who feared whom, who lied best. Then Niccolo arrived, charming and warm, his smile easy enough to seem harmless, until Lena noticed how carefully he watched everyone. When he poured wine for her, he murmured, "Do not let my brother make you think silence means protection." Lena glanced at Sio. He had heard. His face stayed calm, but one muscle moved in his jaw. Niccolo smiled as if he had won something small. Niccolo was everything Sio was not on the surface, relaxed, amused, open-handed. His questions came wrapped in warmth, but Lena heard the sharpness underneath. Sio answered most of them with silence. Niccolo laughed as if he had spent his whole life surviving that silence by refusing to let it win. Overwhelmed by the room, Lena escaped into the freezing garden. Sio followed almost immediately. Without comment, he draped his jacket over her shoulders. The warmth hit her first, then his scent. She hated how comforting it felt. She hated even more that he seemed to know. But before silence could soften her, she asked again, "Did you know my father?" Sio looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said at last. One word. Not enough. Never enough. Lena's grip tightened around the jacket. "Then why have you lied to me every day since I walked into your office?" For once, the cold answer did not come quickly. In the garden, Lena kept her eyes on his face this time. Sio did not explain her father's name. He only looked toward the dark lawn, and that avoidance told her almost as much as a confession. She shifted to Leander, the name attached to the restaurant and the photograph hidden in her notebook. CO's answer was short. Dead. Nothing more. But his hands betrayed him, closing into fists at his sides. Lena did not press that wound. Instead, she said quietly that keeping the restaurant alive was a strange kind of loyalty. CO looked at her then, and for once, the control in his face thinned. Not gone, never gone, but thinned enough for Lena to see pain underneath it. Then she returned his jacket. The movement surprised him. Warmth is not an answer, she said, and I am tired of accepting pieces of you in place of the truth. CO's eyes darkened, not with anger alone, with fear. He was beginning to understand that she could still leave. The freezing air seemed to hold them in place. CO lifted a hand as if to touch her jaw, then stopped before contact. That restraint cut deeper than the touch would have. His phone rang. The change in him was immediate. His hand dropped. His expression flattened. The cold version returned before the screen had stopped glowing. He answered, listened, and ordered Tommaso to take her home. In the car, Tommaso spoke more than usual, which meant very little and somehow enough. Leander's death had changed CO, and when Lena asked if Aldo Damiani had known Leander, Tommaso's hands tightened on the wheel. Your father tried to save someone, he said at last. So quietly Lena almost missed it. That is all I can say. It was the first real answer anyone had given her, and it was worse than silence. Her father had not been a customer. He had been involved. He had made a choice, and someone had buried the result. During the drive, Lena understood why the garden moment scared her more than the threats. CO had shown her something private, and now her mind wanted to protect it. That was the dangerous part. Days later, he told her they were going to his Montauk estate to translate documents in quiet. Ignored the way his voice changed when he said it. Lena almost refused. Instead, she packed files, pens, her notebook, and the old photograph. The 3-hour drive was tight with unspoken tension. CO brought silence. Lena brought questions. The road stretched east, the city fell away, and the truth felt closer than it had in weeks. Halfway there, she told him to stop the car. CO looked at her sharply. She said she would not go another mile unless he admitted why Aldo's name was in the files. The driver slowed. CO's control cracked just enough for anger to show. Do not force me to protect you from things you cannot survive, he said. As the highway gave way to the isolated coast, CO finally spoke, though not about Aldo. The wooden house had belonged to his family for 40 years. He said it without sentiment, but the house disagreed with him. Inside, rosemary and olive oil softened the air. The kitchen was worn in places money would never bother to repair. When CO began cooking, his movements changed. He became quieter, smoother, almost gentle. Lena watched him crush garlic, heat oil, salt pasta water, and for a few minutes the man from the office seemed to loosen around the edges. He looked less like a threat there. That was exactly what made the house so dangerous. Lena did not let herself forget the fight in the car. She sat at the counter, opened her notebook, and wrote the words he had said. Things you cannot survive. CO noticed. You document everything, he said. Lena looked up. Someone in your family erased enough. I am not helping them erase me. Lena ruined the garlic within 5 minutes. Smoke curled from the pan while she waved a dish towel at it, mortified despite herself, and at her, and said she could translate 3 languages, but apparently could not understand a frying pan. She snapped back that garlic had never paid rent. The laugh that escaped him was brief, rough, and gone almost before it existed. But she heard it. Later, in the oceanfront office, they worked under soft lamplight, with 10 feet between them. He stared too long. She told him to blink. He refused. Then she slid the photograph across the desk and asked who AD. Not touch it. A man who stood in the wrong place, he said. Lena leaned forward. No, my father was a man, not a warning label. The words hit harder than she expected. CO's eyes lifted. For the first time, shame crossed his face before he could bury it. The 10 feet between them became a border neither one crossed. CO looked at the photograph, but still did not touch it. For a moment, Lena thought he might finally answer. Instead, he said only that old files were dangerous because people used them badly. Then tell me before someone else does, Lena said. CO's mouth tightened. The next morning, the fragile peace cracked. She woke early and heard him on the deck, speaking into the phone with the ocean behind him. His voice was calm as he ordered his men to handle arrival. No anger, no hesitation, just procedure. The same hands that had cooked dinner with patient care were now arranging violence before breakfast. Lena stood unseen by the door and felt the 2 versions of him collide. Then CO made another mistake. He said, if Salvarezza reaches her before I tell her about Pier 19, we lose control. Her blood went cold. He was not only hiding the truth, he was racing someone else to it. On the freezing deck, Lena tried to reconcile the man in the kitchen with the man on the phone, and failed. Then she received another childhood photograph. Young CO holding Leander's hand, his small face already too serious. Imaged was a key her mind should not have accepted so easily. It made his cruelty feel connected to pain, And pain is a dangerous explanation when we start using it as forgiveness. Later that day, a prestigious law firm internship appeared in her inbox. Better pay, stability, medical benefits that could help her mother. The escape was clean, bright, and logical. Lena stared at it for a long time, then forwarded every document she had found to a private account. After that, she did something she should have done earlier. She called Elise and gave her the password. "If I disappear," Lena said, "send everything." Elise went silent. Then she whispered, "Lena, what have you gotten into?" Lena looked toward the closed door where CO worked. "Something that started before I was born." Elise begged her to take the internship. Normal bosses who did not send guards to people's homes. Lena knew every argument was right, which somehow made choosing harder. At the office, she overheard Raphael telling CO that she had become too dangerous to keep close. Lena froze outside the door, her hand still on a folder. CO's reply came flat and final. She stayed, not because she was safe, not because she was free, because he had decided. This time Lena did not only feel fear or relief. She quietly photographed the file on Raphael's desk before walking away. If she was a prisoner, she would not be an ignorant one. That night, she packed a small bag and placed it behind the radiator at Elise's apartment. A change of clothes, cash, copies of the files, her mother's medication list. She did not know if she would run, but for the first time, she prepared as if she might. The brown envelope arrived without a return address. Lena remembered Raphael's first rule and opened it anyway. Inside was a faded photograph of her late father, Aldo Damiani, younger than she had ever seen him, standing outside a restaurant she now recognized. On the back, a note told her to ask why her boss knew him. The floor seemed to tilt. She went straight to CO and placed the photo on his desk. "Tell me the truth." His face closed so completely it frightened her. He said her father had been a customer. Nothing more. Lena pulled out her notebook, opened to the copied shipping code, and asked why a customer's initials had been hidden in his old files. CO stood so abruptly his chair struck the wall behind him. The sound cracked through the office. Everyone outside went silent. For 1 second, Severo Marchetti lost control in front of her. "Because your father should have stayed away from my family," he said. And then he stopped, horrified by what he had revealed. CO did not explain, and after that, danger moved faster. Tabloids published photos of Lena beside him and called her the companion of the new crime boss. The word spread before she could stop them. Her mother saw one headline, misunderstood enough to be terrified, and suffered a severe panic attack. Lena arrived breathless to find medication bottles scattered on the table, and her mother trembling beneath a blanket. By evening, fury had replaced shock. She stormed into CO's office and screamed that her real life was being destroyed. Her mother, her privacy, her future, all of it dragged into his shadow. For once, CO did not interrupt her. Then Lena did what he did not expect. She turned to leave, not dramatically, not as a threat. She simply picked up her bag and walked toward the door. CO moved before thinking and blocked her path. The mistake was immediate. Lena looked at him, and the room seemed to lose air. "Move," she said, "or I learn exactly what kind of man you are." Lena told him she could not breathe inside his world. She told him protection that wrecked. Her mother was not protection. She told him she wanted one true thing from him. Just one, without strategy wrapped around it. CO's composure cracked in small, visible places, the tightening jaw, the hand flexing once at his side, the eyes that could not quite leave her face. He looked powerful and trapped at the same time, which was a combination Lena had never expected to see in him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. He said he did not know how to fix what he had done to her. Lena said fixing it would start with not lying. CO stepped aside then, and the movement cost him. "Pier 19, he said quietly. "Your father tried to take Leander out of New York before Vittorio could use him." Lena stopped. CO's face went pale with the confession. And after that, she asked, "What did your family do to him?" Lena crossed the room before caution caught up. She did not know whether she moved from rage, grief, or the terrible pull of finally hearing truth in his voice. She kissed him slowly at first, then desperately, as if 7 weeks of fear, anger, curiosity, and need had found one place to break open. CO stayed still for half a heartbeat. Then his restraint gave way just enough for his hand to close around her waist. The kiss was not simple. Nothing between them was. When they pulled apart, Lena kept her hand against his chest and forced herself to speak before the heat could rewrite the moment. "This does mean I trust you," she said. "And it does mean I'm done asking questions." CO nodded once. He accepted the boundary, but his eyes did not release her. Then Lena added, "If you ever block a door in front of me again, I will leave and I will not come back." CO's hand fell from her waist. That was the first boundary he did not challenge. When Lena turned down the law firm internship, Elise called her insane. Lena did not argue, because from the outside it looked exactly that way. CO used his influence to erase the tabloid stories, doubled security around her mother's home, and sent a message to his enemies that no one repeated in detail. It helped. That was the problem. Every solution he offered tied another thread between her life and his power. By the end of the week, she found him alone in his office, with bruised knuckles and blood dried along one hand. He did not explain. This time, Lena did ask. Sio only looked at her and said some questions were safer unanswered. Then his phone rang. Tommaso's voice came through low and urgent. Salvarezza men had been seen near Lena's mother's building. Sio's face changed in a way that stole every argument from the room. Not cold now, not controlled, afraid. He reached for his jacket, and Lena understood the danger outside had finally caught up with the danger between them. In the cold morning light, Lena faced the contradiction she had been avoiding. The same hands that touched her with restraint had clearly hurt someone else, and those same hands were now shaking with fury, because her mother might be threatened. Her mind searched for reasons, context, anything that would make the blood less real. But she knew better now than to let herself stop there. Later, when Sio stepped into her modest queen's apartment without guards or weapons, he looked almost absurd among her law books, mismatched mugs, and cheap curtains. Yet he also looked painfully real there, too large for the space and too controlled for the softness of it. Lena watched him remove his coat and quietly moved her notebook into a drawer before he could see it. Sio noticed anyway, still collecting evidence. He asked. Lena closed the drawer, still giving me reasons to. Before he could answer, a car alarm screamed outside. Tommaso's shout came from the street. The safe apartment was no longer safe. Without bodyguards, Sio had seemed less armored, and that had lowered Lena's defenses before she noticed, and begun reading a dry paragraph in rhythmic Italian, turning legal language into something unexpectedly intimate. Lena had laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. Sio had looked at her as if she had given him something rare by accident. Again, he had said quietly. For a moment, the room had changed, and the noise outside shattered it. Sio moved to the window and pulled Lena behind him with one arm. This time, she did not let herself melt into the protection. She pushed his arm down and moved to the side, where she could see for herself. Across the street, one of the dark vehicles had its windshield cracked. A man in a gray coat walked away too calmly. Lena recognized the limp, the scarred enforcer from Leander's. Sio cursed in Italian. He had failed to keep danger away, and they both knew it. By then, the softer version of Sio had taken root in Lena's mind. The cook, the wounded brother, the man who could make her laugh over a law textbook. She knew the violent version was real too. She simply began placing it farther away, where it could not interrupt the warmth in front of her. But the cracked windshield outside dragged that violence back into the room. Their embrace in the living room was no longer hesitant, and it was no longer innocent. It was a choice made under pressure, a shelter built during a storm. Sio held her with quiet authority, but Lena felt the tension in his body. He was not untouchable. He was calculating, angry, and scared enough to make mistakes. The apartment seemed smaller around them, her ordinary life bending under the weight of what she had allowed inside. Then her mother called from the bedroom. Confused and frightened, Lena pulled away from Sio at once. Love could wait. Her mother could not. Sio understood control with frightening precision. In public, the hand at the base of her spine had marked her as his before everyone watching. In private, without the black dress, the marble rooms, or the silent men at his back, the same touch could feel like shelter. That difference confused her more than force ever could. But now, with danger outside her mother's building, Lena refused to let comfort blur the truth. When Sio moved close and touched her collarbone, his gaze focused, almost careful, she caught his wrist before he could ask the soft question that always made surrender feel voluntary. Not now, she said. Not while men with guns are outside my mother's apartment. Sio went still. For a second, anger flickered not at her, maybe at himself, maybe at the situation he had failed to control. Then he nodded. Tell me what you need. It was the first time he had asked in a moment, when command would have been easier. When Sio removed his shirt later, it was not in seduction but to wash blood from a shallow cut across his ribs, earned during the scramble outside when Tommaso caught the scarred man's warning package. His tattoos came into view one by one: saints, old symbols, dark lines inked across muscle and scar. Above his hip, another saint watched from his skin, as if faith and violence had been forced to share the same body. Lena touched the edge of the wound, not the ink, and he trembled. The reaction was so sudden, so human, that it disarmed her. His control returned quickly, but not completely. He tried to brush off the injury. Lena refused to let him. She cleaned it with shaking hands, while he stood silent in her tiny bathroom, too large for the cracked tile and dim light. You bleed like everyone else, she said. Sio gave a rough, humorless laugh. That is the part I try to hide. For once, she believed him. Inside her mother's apartment, the distance between them disappeared in a different way. Sio rested his forehead against hers, breathing shallowly, Not out of desire this time, but exhaustion and pain. Yet even there, control never left him completely. He governed himself with the same discipline he used on every room he entered. Lena read his unblinking stare more carefully now. Maybe part of it was honesty, but it also held her in place, pulling her deeper into the quiet gravity of him. She had spent her life building defenses out of humor, work, and responsibility. CO did not smash them. He waited close enough for her to lower them herself. From the bedroom, her mother murmured Aldo's name in her sleep. Siwo heard it. His whole body went rigid. Lena turned sharply. What did she remember? She asked. CO's face closed. Then slowly he said, enough to be in danger. It was not the full truth, but it was no longer a lie. The line between them shifted again. Afterward, Lena sat at the kitchen table, overwhelmed by the rush of feeling through her body and the confusion in her mind. CO used his presence to ground the room, standing near the window while Tommaso swept the street below. She told herself staying was a choice. In that moment it felt true, but she no longer trusted the feeling by itself. In the morning, CO had gone to deal with the threat, but he had left traces everywhere. His scent on the pillow from the brief hour of sleep he had taken on the couch, bloodied gauze in the trash, a double espresso in her mother's only unchipped mug. Lena stood in the kitchen and stared at the cup. It was such a small gesture. That was what made it dangerous. It fit too neatly into the life she still wanted to believe was hers. Then she noticed something beneath the saucer. A folded copy of a police report from 2007, Pier 19. Her father's name was blacked out, but not well enough. There was something deeply disorienting about a dangerous man, imitating domestic life well enough to make it feel real. CO Marchetti, in her kitchen at 6 in the morning, fighting with a broken coffee machine, should have been absurd. Instead, it softened the memory of everything he was. Besides coffee, he left the stolen childhood photograph, the one of him holding Leander's hand. Across the back, in his slanted handwriting, was a single word, stay. Beneath it, almost hidden by the old crease, Lena finally noticed the rest of the original note. Aldo said the boys must not be separated. She picked it up and felt the cage closing from the inside. Then her phone buzzed. Elise had received a message too, a photo of Lena's emergency bag hidden behind the radiator. Someone had found her backup plan. Under the photo were 5 words. He cannot protect you. Lena looked from the message to the photograph in her hand. The trap was no longer only emotional. Someone was tightening it from the outside. Lena stayed for 43 days, long enough for fear to learn the language of romance, long enough for the mansion to stop feeling strange, long enough for CO's silences to become something she thought she could read. But she did not stop keeping copies. She saved names, dates, account numbers, license plates, and every fragment tied to her father. She also stopped pretending CO's tenderness erased his violence. That was the only reason she survived the night. Ottavio returned from Sicily's and walked into dinner with a predator-esque smile. He looked at Lena, then at CO, and said the Damiani name had always been troublesome, especially for a man they executed 16 years ago. The table froze. Lena's pulse went loud in her ears. CO's face went cold and flat, but his hand slipped beneath the table and found hers. Not to claim her this time, to warn her. Ottavio smiled wider. Did he tell you, Yachixt, that your father died trying to save his brother from their own father? In the heavy silence of that dining room, the romance Lena had built around CO finally split open. She understood it all at once. She was not only his lover, not only his secretary, not only the woman he guarded too closely. She was living evidence of an old crime. The daughter of the man who had tried to save Leander and paid for it with his life. CO had kept her near because desire and danger had become the same problem. He wanted her, yes, but he also watched her because she could destroy him, his father, and the empire built over Pier 19. Every tender gesture now carried another meaning. Every act of protection had a lock hidden inside it. Lena looked at CO, then at Ottavio, then at Vittorio watching from the head of the table. For the first time, she did not feel like prey. She had copies, she had names, she had the truth beginning to form in her hands. And she realized that in CO Marchetti's world, love could be real and still be a prison, but a prison could burn from the inside. Every mafia boss story is not only about power, money, revenge, or fear. Beneath the violence and darkness, there is often a painful human lesson about choices, consequences, loyalty, family, and the price of ambition. This story reminds us that no matter how powerful a person becomes, no one can escape the truth forever. Hundreds of people, and make others tremble at the sound of his name. But if his heart is empty, his victory is never complete. The mafia boss in this story represents a man who built his life on control. He believed that fear was stronger than love, that silence was safer than honesty, and that power could protect him from pain. For years, he may have won every battle in the streets, in business, and among his enemies. But the most important battle was never outside him. It was inside his own heart. That is where he truly lost himself. One of the most meaningful lessons from this story is that power without morality becomes a prison. Many people dream of becoming rich, respected, or feared. They think success means having control over others. But real success is not measured by how many people obey you. It is measured by how many lives you protect, how much peace you create, and how much good remains after you are gone. The Mafia boss had money, influence, and protection, but he did not have peace. His life shows us that a person can be surrounded by luxury and still feel completely alone. Another important lesson is that loyalty is valuable, but blind loyalty can destroy lives. In the world of crime, loyalty is often treated like the highest law. People are expected to follow orders without question. Never mean giving up your conscience. A loyal person does not simply protect someone's secrets. A loyal person also has the courage to stop someone from destroying themselves. This story teaches us that loyalty without honesty is dangerous. Real loyalty should be connected to truth, respect, and moral responsibility. The story also shows the heavy cost of revenge. Revenge often feels powerful in the beginning. It gives a person the illusion that pain can be answered with pain, but revenge rarely heals anything. Instead, it creates a chain of suffering that keeps growing. One act of revenge leads to another. One betrayal leads to another. In the end, everyone loses something. The Mafia boss may have believed that revenge would restore his honor, but what it truly did was steal his humanity piece by piece. This is a powerful reminder that forgiveness is not weakness. Sometimes, forgiveness is the strongest decision a person can make because it breaks the cycle of hatred. Family is another central lesson in this kind of story. Many mafia bosses claim they do everything for family. They say they commit crimes to protect the people they love. But protection without honesty can become another form of harm. A family does not only need money or security. A family needs trust, emotional safety, and love that is not poisoned by fear. If a father, husband, brother, or son becomes powerful but loses the ability to show tenderness, then his family may live in a beautiful house, but still feel trapped inside it. This story reminds us that children and loved ones often pay the price for the choices of powerful men. The mafia boss may think his decisions only affect his enemies, but every secret, every violent act, and every betrayal leaves a shadow over the innocent people around him. That is why one of the strongest educational messages is this: before making a decision, we must ask ourselves who will suffer because of it. A selfish choice may bring temporary success, but it can create long-term pain for the people we love most. Another meaningful point is the danger of pride. Pride can make a person refuse to apologize, refuse to change, and refuse to admit they are wrong. The mafia boss may have spent years believing that saying sorry would make him look weak, but in reality, the ability to apologize is a sign of strength. It takes courage to face the damage we have caused. It takes maturity to admit that we hurt someone, and it takes true character to change before it is too late. The story also teaches that redemption is possible, but it always requires sacrifice. A person cannot simply say they have changed. They must prove it through action. Redemption means accepting responsibility, protecting the innocent, telling the truth, and sometimes losing everything that was built on lies. For a mafia boss, redemption may mean walking away from power, exposing corruption, saving someone he once endangered, or choosing love over control. The path to redemption is painful because it forces a person to confront the worst parts of themselves, but it is also the only path that can lead to peace. From a human perspective, this story is powerful because it shows that even the hardest heart can still feel pain. Behind the cold eyes of a mafia boss, there may be regret, loneliness, childhood wounds, or a deep fear of being betrayed. This does not excuse his actions, but it helps us understand that broken people often break others when they never learn how to heal. The educational value here is important. Pain should not become an excuse to hurt people. Instead, pain should become a reason to grow, to seek wisdom, and to choose a better path. For viewers, the lesson is not to admire the criminal lifestyle, but to understand its emptiness. The suits, cars, mansions, and power may look attractive from the outside, but behind them there is often fear, guilt, and loss. A life built on violence can never bring true happiness. A life built on lies can never bring true freedom. And a life built on fear can never create real love. In the end, the story of a mafia boss is really a warning. It warns us that every choice has a consequence. It warns us that money cannot buy peace. It warns us that fear cannot replace respect. It warns us that revenge cannot heal a wounded heart. Most importantly, it reminds us that the greatest power a person can have is not the power to control others, but the power to control themselves. The deepest lesson is simple but meaningful. Choose character over pride, love over control, truth over silence, and forgiveness over revenge. No matter how dark a person's past may be, change is possible when they are willing to face the truth. But the longer someone waits, the higher the price becomes. A mafia boss may win the streets, defeat his enemies, and build an empire, but if he loses his soul, he has lost everything. True strength is not found in violence. True strength is found in responsibility, compassion, humility, and the courage to become better before it is too late.